Hello, everyone, and welcome to the No Zoo Lines podcast. My name is Ari Knazan, and I'm joined by my very good friend, Chad Lyman. We are very happy to bring you episode 2 of the No Zoo Lines podcast. The first one we did a couple of weeks ago was amazing. We got great feedback from it. And this week, we are going to talk about a doozy of a topic, which all police officers are aware of. We're going to be talking about prone restraint, lateral restraint, some of the science behind it, some of the doctors that have talked about it. There's pros and cons to each side, and Chad and I are just going to really get into it and talk about our experiences, what we know, and what the science says, and how much information is out there that is misleading about what we do and how we arrest people. So, Chad, welcome, and let's get into it, man.
Thanks, Ari. Appreciate it. It's great to be here.
So, prone restraint. Let's just kick it off right now and just talk about what prone restraint is and how long we have been using it and what it's used for.
So, prone restraint has been used kind of forever. If you have a combative subject who you need to place into handcuffs, we've got in the States, we've got probable cause. I'm not sure what you guys call it in Canada, probable cause of a crime being committed, and we're going to make an arrest. We can even handcuff someone in a detention status based on the call, based on their behavior. But when we go to gain custody of that individual for whatever the reason is, a warrant, probable cause, whatever it is, and then that individual resists arrest or fights with us, struggles with us, well, then the most likely place custody is going to take place is on the ground, because it robs them of movement. It robs them of their ability to transition easily. It begins to control them, and then we can work them into custody. Conversely, something you and I train quite a bit, because there's multiple ways to do this. This is going to come out in the podcast. Like, we don't have one way. We might even use a wall or another object. But today we're going to talk about the ground, and the ground is overwhelmingly where these altercations end up. And they end up either through the bad guy fighting violently with the officer and everybody kind of falls over, or through a planned team tactic where we execute a takedown. Once prone, Ari, I'm going to ask you this. I'll kick this back to you. My experience early in my career, but I started in 98, was that once we got prone, there wasn't a lot of plan. It was a lot of piling on, and a lot of, everybody jump on, try to get an arm, try to get an arm, try to get a leg, try to get a leg. But it was that polyester pile. When I first started, and that was probably my first decade of policing. Were we still doing polyester piles when you came on the job?
Yeah, I mean, it still happens to today. So it was a massive thing. Just more people in means more control in the eyes of cops who don't train, which obviously we know is not always the case. So yes, totally happened.
Yes. Yes. And then the idea was, hey, we're going to control an arm, leg, and we were trying to gain control of subjects in a prone status by controlling exterior limbs. And we know from our training that there's no control at the end of my arm, at my wrist, at my hand. You can dictate or begin to direct me. You're a master at this. You often will dictate where someone begins to turn, or even take someone to the ground by an exterior limb. And you're very good at this. I found most police officers are not. And so my early years were all just kind of pile on. And that led me to try to do a principle-based team tactic, where even if you do it alone, there are certain goals. You're trying to control certain areas. So we know from our grappling, the most important areas on the human body to control. And Ari, what are those?
On the ground?
Yeah.
Well, I love to control the hips so they don't have movement, right? So that's a big one for me. It depends if their arms are out and stuff like that, but hips are a big one. Hips and head. I mean, those are my points.
That's it. And I think everyone who actually does a martial art where they control another human on the ground are going to say similar things. It's going to be head and hips. There's various ways we can control the hips and or the upper body. And then you can add in lower body controls, leg anchors, leg weaves, leg bundles, different things like this. That can give you additional control. But I'm a huge fan of starting with the hips and the head. Now, in my experience at Vegas Metro, I had already started controlling people on the ground and teaching this to other police departments at the head and the hips. But I had not been to our training division for updates on team control. Mike Bland had gone to our training command or our training position at Metro for in-service training. He was also teaching the academy and then also teaching in-service. And
Yeah.
Mike's a familiar BJJ black belt who's also a retired sergeant now, but a longtime member and a very good coach and instructor.
Mhm.
And Mike had been teaching in the unit I was being sent to. He had already been teaching subject management and control in a prone position. And he had coined the term segmenting. That comes from Mike Bland.
Hmm.
And Mike in his mind said, hey, if we can teach the officers to control the hips, the shoulders, and the head, stay off the neck, stay off the back, for many reasons. But control hips, shoulders, head. Well, then we can control the subject's movement. We can begin to lock them into a position, and then we can begin to safely manipulate them into handcuffs. And so when I first went to the training division, I thought, I'm going to have to do my time up here and then work for this change in the way we take people into custody. Within a week, I realized we're already teaching it, a version of it, and that was what Mike was teaching. And
Mhm.
then Mike and I have collaborated over the years. You and I have collaborated. There's many nuances that we can work into that, but basically prone custody, there's a few things to think of. Control their head, control their hips. You can control legs and stuff like that as well. Once we have them controlled and we have a dominant position, then we work for arm extractions or arm control. We can also do those things simultaneously if they're not hiding their arms, and we work them into cuffs. And largely what it eliminates is long drawn out struggles or intermediate force being used as you're attempting to control someone. By that, and I'll ask you about this for the Canadian perspective, in the States, typically what would happen is our guys would not control the subject's movement. They would struggle to get the arm behind the back. Subject's just pulling the arms in, or they're flailing. And our guys would respond with ineffective strikes in an attempt to get compliance. And what we normally found with that, with a person who was already fighting, is they just continued to fight
Mhm.
because those ineffective strikes did not lend more control or dominance over the person. It didn't slow the action. And the person just stayed at that same resistance level. And now we have cops ineffectively striking, attempting to gain custody. Do you
Yeah.
guys have the same thing?
Yeah, it's the same. You know, a few years ago, I did a weird little side thing that I do. So the people that I would arrest, you know, you got the rounders that have been around a long time, being arrested tons, and a lot of comments would come out of their mouth, like, you guys beat me up and things like that. And so it's like, I would say, I've never beaten you up. Tell me about what your experience is. And he's like, well, I was drunk one day, I was high, and I was fighting you guys, and all you did was just bash your knee into the side of my legs, and you were punching me and stuff like that. And then I said, well, how did that make you feel? What was the thing? And it's like, well, I felt like I was being punished. So those strikes were like, they're just punishing me, and it's like a revenge thing. And so it was very interesting that I heard that. I heard that more than once, that it was like the strikes are punishing. And that's not what we're trying to do, right? Our grappling based stuff in jujitsu is understanding how body anatomy works and separating it and getting someone to custody safely. So we know that strikes can be effective, but we also know they can be massively ineffective. And what happens when you're being punished? You try to run away from the pain. You try to ball up. You fight more, because that is just part of our makeup when that happens. So I think that happens all the time. I think it happens around the world, especially with those kind of ineffective strikes.
Yeah. And what I've found is, and you even think about this in grappling, when you have the new person come to the gym and they get stuck in a bad position or even in an inferior position, not even bad, side
Mhm.
control bottom. And I put a lot of body weight on them
Yeah.
and they feel dominated and they feel trapped. They will often tap due to just feeling helpless, feeling like I can't get out of this,
Yes.
and feeling like it's going to get worse. They don't realize the pressure you feel is the pressure you feel. It's over.
Yeah.
Like if you're taking it, you could take it for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So they quit or they tap. Strength deters and de-escalates. Weakness is provocative and inflames.
Mm.
And when we do an ineffective strike, even though we're being aggressive, and I'm not an apologist, I'm not a police apologist, where
Yeah.
I'll show some video with no background and then go, oh, look, they're striking and they should do jujitsu.
Yep.
You are ineffectively striking someone in an attempt to gain control to handcuffing, and it's not working. You should seek more training and seek a better way because it's not working. You're ineffective. If strikes were allowed based on the subject's resistance level, and a single strike meant that they would instantly cuff up, well, then I'd say punch everyone once.
Yep.
But that's not the case. It often, the ineffectiveness of the strikes, because you're on your knees. Think of the UFC, think of any competitive bout. Where are the fights being finished with strikes? It's not by both people being on the ground. Now, you do have strike fights finished where you have a person in top position, but their knees aren't on the ground. They're in knee on belly and they're striking, or they're standing above punching down. Well, that's not really a law enforcement function. So that's not a great tactic. That's not something I could train and then deploy in the field realistically on a regular level, because it's not going to be ruled to be acceptable force where I just stand over a guy and drop bombs on him and I'm just racking him. Like that's not reasonable. And so where we do end up punching people is with both of our knees on the ground or our butt on the ground, or we're laying on them and rabbit punching them. And that weakness, that ineffectiveness is provocative, and it inflames the resistance, and it does not lead to compliance. If you would just establish yourself with dominant position, and let me ask you if you've had this experience in the field. Have you ever established a dominant position on a subject who is struggling and or fighting, resisting at least at an assaultive level, which in our line of work down here means they've shown some intent to do harm towards us through either trying to wrestle us, grab our fingers, hit us in the groin, punch us. So they're in assaultive resistance. We've gotten them to the ground.
Yeah.
Have you ever established a position where then that person changes their mind and just quits and you can work them into custody?
From a position?
Yeah.
Yeah.
From a spot on top. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
You've established top with pressure, and that has led to compliance. That's another reason we're big supporters of a prone system where we can establish that dominant position, which often leads to compliance.
So I'm going to go down the rabbit hole a little bit here, but I think we need to make a very important distinction that police jujitsu or combatives is different than street fighting or
100%.
fighting. But 100%. But the problem is people, it's like, well, you get in this position or you do these MMA moves or you drop the elbows and stuff. That's not how we get people into custody. So I have this, I had someone talk to me, they were a Taekwondo black belt, and it's like, well, Taekwondo is effective as a martial art, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, how would you use that in a police setting? It's primarily kicks, right? And they're like, yeah. And it's like, how do you use that primarily in our police setting? And there's a long pause. And I'm like, are you head kicking everyone into custody? And then there's this like, right, that's obviously not going to happen. And if you do, we are held liable for excessive force, injury. It is not an effective way. So police jujitsu is a very particular skill set. Now,
I've ended up sandwiched between the ground suspect, me. I got handcuffed in my early career to one of the suspect's arms in a struggle. And then he kept fighting and the arm was going all over. They had to pin my arm down and get a handcuff key out and work it. And the cuff's going up and down on my arm.
Yeah.
Scrape me all up, irritating. So it was chaotic. And so what we did is what we've done, you and I and guys who are similar to us, is we've re-engineered, okay, how would I control someone on the ground? And Control on the ground goes to grappling arts. It's going to be wrestling. It's going to be jujitsu. There are arts from other countries, whatever they are, sambo, whatever it is, but it's primarily jujitsu and wrestling. That's what it is, and that's how we're controlling people. And jujitsu is very useful for actually finishing and moving the arms and controlling the arms and putting handcuffs on. It's very similar to that's your submission. But to your point earlier, that's the only one you're seeking.
Yeah.
And the prone position is hard to establish, but once established with decent positioning, especially with a partner controlling areas of the body, it then becomes hard to resist. And now it slows everything down and it makes the withdrawal of the arms and everything in the custody easy. The things that, well, New York City several years ago, to give a little historical background, New York City passed a law that said it is unlawful, not policy. It's not in their policy manual of NYPD for the New York's lawmakers for the city passed a law saying it's unlawful for a police officer to put weight or pressure on a prone subject, and it's punishable. It's an arrestable offense.
Mm-hmm.
So that changed the game for NYPD because now you have to be very, very, very careful. And is it even safe to engage in a ground fight at all? In the idea that if at any point in that fight, and it's a fight, even if you train to perfectly place yourself, when people are bucking around and fighting and moving around, weight shifts, different things shift, you can fall across the subject. Well, suddenly you put weight on it. If that subject expires or passes, you've created a crime. Even if he doesn't, you've created a crime. They're more likely to pursue it if there's a death involved.
Yeah.
But, it's a crime now. So NYPD suddenly gets handcuffed different than the whole rest, than anywhere else that I know of. And I train people all over the US, all over Canada.
Mm-hmm.
This law is different at the time. And so we're just going to talk about this really frankly, but I hope everyone stays tuning in so they can see that we're taking a 10,000 foot view of this whole issue. The reason it's an issue is Renee Gracie publicly has come out. And initially he came out when this legislation got passed and he was against it. He said, it's nonsense. And it's handcuffing the cops. And what are we doing? And I'm using my words, not his, but that was a general idea. And I agreed.
Mm-hmm.
It's nonsense. Fast forward a couple years and he has worked, in fact, he comes up with what he claims is a new way to restrain, and that's lateral. And Renee basically buys into a narrative that is put out by a certain segment of the media, a certain segment of legislation, lawmakers, that cops are randomly killing people. There is no science to back this up. There is some split science, to be fair, but the overwhelming scientists will agree this is not causing death. And we're going to get into reasons why people die a little bit later, but this is setting a stage. Why is this even a topic? So then Renee comes up with this. Well, he says he comes up with a way to laterally restrain. And I actually probably think he might have discovered it in training on his own, but because he's not in the industry, he doesn't realize guys already do versions of this. You and I saw it and immediately knew, well, that's not new. Now, I don't mind if he teaches it, the same as if I don't mind if ABC DT company teaches it, same as I don't mind if Wisconsin Department of Corrections teaches it. I don't care, but he starts saying, hey, I created this. He starts moving to say, hey, no one else can use it. I'm going to trademark it. And I've created this unique way to take people into custody. And it's laterally on their side in a position similar to what some people call the recovery position, which I think is poor wording.
Mm-hmm.
But a side versus a prone. And he claims, he makes some very aggressive marketing where he says this is going to save lives on both sides. He made several statements that I want to dive into a little bit. One was this will save lives on both sides. This will always work. No one can escape it. In fact, I have a challenge, very unique challenge set up in a very unique way on how it's going to work. It can be trained in one setting, in one class, and then annually, and you can maintain all proficiency to where it's never not going to work. and no one's going to die. And that was kind of the push. And suddenly he is actively saying, as a training provider, prone restraint is not safe. He actually names his other thing after a safe. He uses a safe word in the name of it to make the connotation. Even the takedown to get in the position, which is a high-low that's been done from before you and I were cops, and I've been cops since '98. High-low's been done before that. He called it a safe down. It's not a takedown. And so the whole marketing is, oh my goodness, prone restraint's killing people. Now, interestingly enough, a person on one of the posts said, hey, I thought you were irritated at this and you came out against it. And I screenshotted it just because I found it amusing.
Yeah.
And he says, I was, but now I'm best friends with these legislators. And now we're rolling out this safe way to take people into custody. So that's kind of a premise background wise. What do you think? Where are we at?
Well, I touched upon this when the whole thing came out with Henner. I did a podcast with Dr. Mike Simpson. We talked about it. I wanted to take a very measured approach on it. I think you and I both agree that there's nothing wrong with a lateral restraint. We have no issue on that. It's different ways to arrest. I think what you and I have a massive problem with are when a provider like that claims that it's 100% effective and no one's going to die and things like that. And I am not making that up. That is something that has been said. Now, to be very clear, language and websites have been changed since we've come out with pushing against this and what Henner's put out. Chad, you and I have some massive concerns. We basically held him to task and said, listen, police officers have a tough job. It doesn't matter if you're prone, lateral, whatever. In custody, deaths do occur. And you and I both said, and this is something we don't want, but that system is going to be used, that lateral system, and someone will expire while that's being used. And then he will have to answer to that of what's he going to say? Oh, it was done incorrectly. Like there's all these things. So they're very large words that he was using that I just don't think help our profession. Again, I have to be very clear that I think arresting someone in a lateral position can be advantageous. I don't think it is new either. So I got some massive problems with that what he's talked about.
Yeah. It's just the way, listen, it's how you present things, how you market things. And it could be argued that I'm not as an effective marketer as him, as he is from a dollar and cents perspective. I don't know. I don't care. I don't study that. My sole goal is to impact my profession as a whole before I'm too old to do it. And that's what I've been trying to do for years. Now, because of my consistency and my stick-to-itiveness over the years, people see value in me, and I've begun to make some money off of the things I do, and I charge. I'm in a business setting as well.
Mm-hmm.
Henner actually talked to me, and one of the things he said is he thought maybe this is because we're in some way competitors. And I said, well, you've had GST for how long? And we talked about that. And then I said, how many times have I ever done a GST post? And I think my stuff's better, but I think your stuff's fine. Like if someone wants to train GST or EFC I would really recommend training with Rob McGow, for example, Officer Survival Series.
Yeah.
That is a comprehensive program. It's one of the best I've ever seen. Like, please go train with that guy. Yeah, if you train with us, go train with that guy. He's outstanding. He's going to teach you additional things. So there's a lot of people in the space. What I've taken issue with, and why this has become an issue for a podcast, is there are some police administrators who do not train, who don't understand controlling people on the ground. They don't understand. All they see is liability, and they think, well, if we switch this and this is all true, we're going to have diminished liability, and that's just not the case. That's not true. Lateral restraint, as trained by Henner, has also been trained by multiple other dudes in our space.
Yep.
I'm not a huge fan of it. I prefer prone restraint because I feel it gives me more control, especially if I don't have a partner. My system cannot be two-person based.
Yes.
You and I tomorrow could be in a car on patrol. We stop a vehicle occupied 3 times. Driver stays, front passenger stays, back passenger rabbits. I'm passenger, you're driver. We're not both running. I'm running, I'm putting it out. I go foot pursuit, we're going this way. You jump on the air and go, hey, I've still got the car. I need at least 1 to 2 cars to me. I've got 2 in the car. I'm freeing the air. Chad's in foot pursuit. Now the air is mine, and I'm bringing units to me. But I catch my guy 3 blocks east after 2 turns. There's no one there to do a safe down with me. There's no one there to do custody with me. Now, could I hold him and wait for cover if situation allows? But it might be a thing where I've had guys get tired and turn around and fight me.
Yeah.
And now we're fighting. I've had guys want to go into a residence that didn't appear to be theirs because they're trying to force their way in the door. I can't wait. I have to take action at that point, and I got to snatch this guy up. I've had guys run into occupied stores where there's shoppers. I've had guys run into boys and girls clubs, into a room with children.
Yeah.
I can't wait for 4 more officers and leave them in the room with these kids. I'm going in the room, and now we're going to fight. I'm putting it out, and guys are coming to me, but I don't always have my tactic has to be based on solid fundamentals that control certain positions and control an individual and allow me to do them with a partner or on my own. Now, we can have a team tactic and say this could be specific for a DV call, male half inside, we swept the house, no one else inside, female half's outside with another officer. You and I are talking to the male because we know we have probable cause to arrest him. You've come back inside with me because we know we're going to go hands-on with this guy. Now the fight breaks out in the house, and we know no one else is in there. Could we do a 2-person thing very, very similar to the lateral restraint that, for example, Henner teaches? Absolutely. And we could do that reasonably safely. Could we do that same thing as a team, even on Las Vegas Boulevard, where I have 100 people around me? Where if you think about both officers are positioned on the same side of the body, both hands are busy, one bundling legs, one bundling arms, both visions planes are the same direction.
Right.
So we've lost complete visual of our 6. Well, I can't use that in a crowd in Vegas. I've got to use something where one guy's at the head, one guy's at the hips. We've got cross visual. We both got lateral visual. And now we got 360-degree visual on the crowd. So it's not that his stuff doesn't work. And I'm not even going to call it his. He's claiming it as his. But it's not that lateral restraint would not work. Lateral restraint can be effective. And the things he is showing can be effective. But so is prone.
Well, the thing is, though, I mean, he kind of talked about how prone was the way of the past or whatever like that, but GSD still teaches prone.
Yeah. So, yeah.
So weird.
Right out of his mouth, he confirmed it with me. And by the way, to his credit, we had a phone conversation. That phone conversation was decent.
Yeah.
That phone conversation was an exchange. We don't see things the same way. We still don't.
Yeah.
I think he would say the same. He was gracious in calling me. At no point did he insult me or any of that. We just don't see things the same way. We don't do business the same way.
Yeah.
We think of things differently. That's all.
Yeah.
But having said that, we talked for 40 minutes why prone wasn't safe, or he tried to. And I'm kind of schooled in this arena.
Yeah.
And then finally he says, well, we still teach prone restraint. And I said, what? And he goes, yeah, we still teach prone restraint. I said, why would you ever teach prone restraint if you believe and you market that it's not safe? Like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. Stop teaching it.
Yeah.
Or stop saying it's unsafe. I don't care which. So that's our whole issue with Henner. I wanted to let our listeners know, they've seen posts by us in the past. I don't have an ongoing feud with Henner. I'm not mad at the guy. But if he makes more videos where he says people don't get killed, no one can escape, I'm going to address that. Let's address real quick the safety aspects that are false. Whether you're going prone or lateral, the threat to the officer does not increase by either system. I don't have any evidence from 98 to today of a low level struggle to custody where an officer was in a prone position, prone top position, establishing handcuffs where we had death. I have examples where guys escape that position and now it's turned into a gunfight or a fight. But from prone restraint, I know of no significant injury or death to an officer ever. Do you have any that you can recall or that you've heard of?
Not personally and not around. I
Yeah.
mean, this is not to say that it doesn't happen. Now, I think this is a great segue into the actual science of who is actually dying in custody and, what are the reasons behind it. So I know that you and I both made notes and we'll probably be looking at them here. So,
Yeah, so let's talk about that because the other claim is lateral restraint will save lives on both sides. We both said there's no evidence that I know of any officer death from simply being in a dominant position for prone restraint. I don't know of any. And I have extensive exposure at minimum. So let's look at who is dying. Ari, there's what I like to call a deadly mix. What are some of the factors that you've found in things you've looked up? And mine are going to be the same because it's out there. It's easy to find. What have you found through either research or also lesson plans or even training you've done of what puts people at a greater risk of expiring in a struggle with police during a attempted custody battle?
So since I don't have any personal experience of someone dying while I was restraining them, I have to rely on the information which has been provided to the FBI, to the National Library of Medicine, for science. There's all these articles and actual medical papers that have been done. So I'm a numbers guy. And if the numbers show me something different, I am the first to be like, hey, we need to now shift the way we do business. So what are some of the factors that are happening? I can tell you that drugs is a massive one. Elevated heart rate because of, say, methamphetamine use or cocaine or any type of drug elevated that way. We also know that comorbidities such as obesity, poor healthy lifestyle, someone who is 400 pounds, has clogged arteries. I mean, these are all things that affect what's happening in a struggle with police. So, I mean, those are a couple things. They have things called excited delirium, which that term is now being phased out because it's not very interesting. Actually, I'd like to do a podcast on that. But we used to use excited delirium all the time. But people who are elevated in a hysterical manner. So
yeah. I was just at a conference last week that was a use of force conference, and now doctors and stuff are starting to say elevated medical situation.
yeah,
There's all this stuff, and they just rename it, but the guy looks the same to me.
yeah.
He's exhibiting the same behaviors, and so what we're looking at are an additional factor that can be present. Can be some kind of mental illness or some kind of chronic mental illness can be a problem. And when you combine that with some of the factors that you listed, where maybe you have a mentally ill person who's also a chronic drug user, and they have such an unhealthy lifestyle, they're not eating properly, they're not exercising regularly, they're not getting proper amount of sleep. They're elevating their heart rate through artificial means, not through a healthy workout regimen. And so it's being elevated and then coming down, elevated and coming down artificially through narcotics, which is not a safe way to get your heart rate up. They may have underlying health issues that are significant, to include enlarged hearts, to include diabetes, to include untreated unhealthy levels of blood pressure, things like this that they may not even know they have, because their lifestyle is not conducive to being healthy in general. They're not
Right.
going for, physical. And so now you have this mix of all these factors, and you factor in a struggle with the police, a struggle for custody, an elevated heart rate. They've done studies that talk about just what happens to your heart rate when the police say, hey, come here, or when the lights come on and you're driving a car.
Yeah.
Just what happens, the involuntary spike in heart rate that actually even officers feel when they hear a siren perk on a half block away and they're in their POV driving to the store, and they have a quick spike, and they kind of look for, where's the car, what's it doing? So this police contact can cause an elevation in and of itself. When you have these other factors that I don't know if I want to use the word normal, because honestly, I'm not trying to stigmatize anybody. I have people in my family who
Yep.
have mental health issues. I have people in my family who have narcotics issues,
Yep.
all these things. So I would say a normal baseline healthy human, something like that, maybe.
Mhm.
Those people are not spontaneously just dying randomly because they're being placed into a position while officers are attempting custody. It's almost always this deadly mix. Now, at this use of force conference, some of the doctors, there were both some PhD type doctors who are professors, and they do some of the scientific experiments. And there were also doctors, like medical
Yeah.
doctors. But they were in a consensus, and their consensus was this. It's important for them to really figure out why this is happening from a professional point of view and from an ethical point of view.
Mhm.
Their point of view was, if we could really find a reason, like, hey, you guys are doing this thing, and we're finding a causative effect that is consistent, that is a predictable response to that, is people are having significant health problems and or dying because you're doing this thing. For example, lethal force, when we shoot at people, that has a causative effect, and nobody disputes that.
Right.
These doctors said the whole reason, a couple of the doctors who were at the use of force conference said, some people think I'm just like a cop lover or something. They said, for me, it was intellectually interesting.
Hmm.
Why are these people dying? We're calling it asphyxiation, for example. One doc was talking to me, and he says, asphyxiation in an ER, not police related, is the guy was working under his car, the jack fell, and the car fell on his sternum in a
Yes.
very specific spot. The car was there then for a significant amount of time. They finally remove it, and he has crushing injuries that are fatal in and of themselves. He hasn't died yet. They rush him to the ER. We try to save him. That dude died of asphyxia. A guy hiking and a boulder rolls upon him, and
Yes.
now he's trapped. And that dude dies over the course of 6 hours. But he also has significant injuries internally. That dude's dying of asphyxia. He said, I was seeing these police cases labeled asphyxia,
Yeah.
and these guys don't have traditional injuries. So it was interesting to me. So
So
he
is
said,
that so, Chad? Would that be? It's not being asphyxiation, because I read this in the National Library of Medicine, an article. They said it's not asphyxiation that's happening; it's actually a cardiac event that is occurring. But the media calls it asphyxiation because it seems like all these cops are holding someone down where they can't breathe.
policing calls it asphyxiation.
Yeah.
Policing, my department calls it that.
Yeah.
And I work here. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely a cardiac event. And they said, so now let's draw parallels to the cardiac event.
Yeah.
And he said, what if we could help the officers take them into custody in a way that wouldn't cause a cardiac event? By the way, I'm all for that. For me, one of the things that bothers me about this whole discussion, and one of the things that really got me going, having a training provider jump on board on this discussion that
Mhm.
we spoke of earlier, is you are ethically impugning me if you think I don't care about a tactic that'll randomly kill humans. That I'm using low-level force not intended to cause harm. And well, I could either handcuff them successfully or they could die.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm good. That's how I would have to be thinking if I was just okay with this happening. I'm not okay with it happening, but it's a cardiac event, to your point. And the doc said, these same people, he said, let's take the police event out. And let's take the drug addict with the unhealthy lifestyle. Well, what's his ultimate death? It's him having sex. It's him partying. It's him in his sleep. It's him taking too much and having a good trip, and it overwhelms him and it kills him. It's him slowly dying of heart issues that are being exacerbated by his narcotics use and him having a heart attack. He goes, these guys are dying in various circumstances that have nothing to do with police restraint cases. But now that's your guy who is the threat, now has all these things on board, and now he's dying while cops are trying to handcuff him. And now we have this cardiac event. So he did say, well, there's two important things. The courts in the US are starting to say, absent a crime, like you have a crime, this guy committed a crime. Like cops stop fighting with people to help them. Like knock it off. Like if he took a bunch of dope and he's in his own house, call medical. If medical can help him, that's great. If they can't and he expires, we don't want you to be the reason he expires.
Right.
So that's what the courts are starting to take a stand on here in the States. That's a separate podcast. For our purposes today, from a doctor perspective, he said, it is important that you have a custody mechanism trained that allows you to achieve position plus custody rapidly to start the medical process. And it is important that you shift from custody and control to medical and care in your mindset for the patient, for the subject who is now becoming a medical patient, at least in the short term.
Right.
He says, this is a cardiac event. Time is of the essence.
Right.
So he says, for example, one of the examples used by folks who don't do this job, don't get exposed to this liability, is, oh, well, if they're struggling, just hold them until they stop struggling and they'll get tired and then you'll cuff them and everybody will be happy. Well, if this is a cardiac event, he'll stop struggling when he can't breathe anymore and he'll die.
Yeah.
And by the way, that happens. I'm not saying that won't happen with prone, but it's going to happen with lateral. Your point earlier, this deadly mix does not care if you handcuff laterally or prone.
Right.
It just depends. I know I've probably arrested multiple people that we get down to jail and they need to go see medical. So they're not having their cardiac event until we're walking through the doors of jail. And maybe they survive it. Maybe it's a minor event. You mentioned earlier you haven't had any of these. I've had two where I've at least one I was involved in quite a bit, but he also had cut himself. So he had a bleeding issue. He was suicidal.
Yeah.
And he was super high. And so he had a cardiac event, and they think he started having a cardiac event, and then they think his heart stopped beating because of potential blood loss. But that was kind of a combination thing. And then another one was one where I just kind of arrived. But I've gone to a few over my years as a youth sports expert for the department. And it's never been anybody who was like 35 years old, normal health, not like in shape, like just normal health and not on dope and not mentally ill. Like everyone who's died has been mentally ill or exhibiting signs of being super high, mentally ill, or both at the time of the struggle. They've struggled ineffectively, they've been restrained, and then they've just died. We had one guy who died in custody after we gained custody, who, unbeknownst to us, but we found out later, had a heart attack, gone to the hospital 2 days earlier.
Right.
Gotten out of the hospital, lasted a day clean, got dope on his second day post-heart attack, took said dope, got in a foot pursuit with us, bike pursuit first, then foot pursuit, and then just collapsed. And then as the coppers gained custody, he expired.
Right.
It's an in-custody death, but he has a deadly mix. He's a chronic drug user. He's got a heart issue, and now he's got an elevated heart rate from contact with the police.
So, Chad, let me just throw a stat. So I was doing some research on this, and California passed a law in 2015 called AB 71. And California began tracking data about when people died after police use of force. Now, between the years of 2016 and 2022, of the hundreds of thousands of people that were arrested, 22 people died after being restrained in the stomach down position.
How many?
22 out of several hundred thousands arrests. Now,
Yeah.
here's the interesting part of this stat. They found that after these investigations and after the autopsies, 19 of the 22 who died following the prone restraint tested positive for meth. The other interesting case was in all 22 cases of the people, they were all in crisis, either struggling with addiction, mental illness, or otherwise behaving erratically. So that's the stat that is attached to this.
So having experienced this a couple times, these guys will, in effect, right in front of your eyes, work themselves to death. You and I have a governor. This is why I always love guys who say, oh, I'd never quit. I would work out. Man, right now I can just set a clock, go, okay, every 2 seconds I need a burpee. And if you go beyond 2 seconds, you fail. But everyone's gonna quit. It's not a big deal. You laughed out loud. The difference is so I've learned over the years, my mind will tell my body to quit and I'm still okay. Mm-hmm. So I'll still continue to push. I've heard the Navy SEAL rule, and I've heard it be you have 40% more, you even have 60% more. It depends on who's giving the story. Right. When you think you're done, you got another 40% in the tank or 60% in the tank. Well, I believe that's somewhat true as well. I always quit before I'm done. That's the truth. Over the years, I've gotten better at prolonging that and working through issues and staying moving. I've gotten to the point where I don't necessarily quit. Like I don't quit on the round, but I know I could go harder. I'm not going as hard as I could go all the time. It's not happening. I'm trying, but I'm not. I could give more. These guys don't have that. They will literally work until they're done. Yeah. It is too late. Like they will take themselves to that point and then push beyond it, because I say there's no governor because I'm not a doctor. I don't totally understand what's happening, but I'll tell you what, the one guy who had cut himself, we were struggling with him. He's spurting blood. We know he's hurt. We know he's high. Medical is right there, but they won't come over because he's still fighting.
Right.
We literally started to plead with him. Stop. We're trying to help you. We weren't striking him. We were controlling him, trying to get him into cuffs. We got him into cuffs. He started kicking and thrashing. Medical would not come over. We had to, they're standing there. He's bleeding everywhere. He's kicking. We start to bundle his legs. We get him on his hip. We start to bundle his legs and we start to apply the hobbles.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at his eyes and I see his eyes just go from anger or like intensity. It wasn't really even anger. He was like, I think he was convinced we were trying to kidnap him or something. Right. I see his eyes go from a combination of fear, intensity, determination to just slack. And I realize I'm watching life leave this guy. Mm-hmm. And then he just goes all the way slack and his face changes and his eyes change. And I just realized he just worked himself to death. He's dead.
Yeah.
Now, medical came and they started working him. They came down. We were able to get him calm enough. They came down, loaded him. They were working him. They had to go up this like little grassy hill because we were in a backyard. And by the time they got him to the top of the hill, they were already starting to go, yeah, this guy's dead. And then by the time they got him to the car, they're still working on him. But then by the time they got in the car, they're saying verbally, yeah, he's not going to make it. Someone come follow us. Mm-hmm. And the signs of life are gone. Like his eyes are glazed over. They were open. He didn't even close his eyes. They were just open, but it's like I saw a distinct change in him. And he just worked himself to death. And that is what it is. He was super high. We got there. He had been jumping on the top bunk of a bunk bed through the roof. He was already bleeding. He jumped out a second story window and cut himself with the window. A piece of glass got lodged in his throat. And then he's running around the backyard and he is just spurting. And we finally get him tackled. We beanbagged him because he had glass in his hands. He's threatening to cut us. He threw it at us. We stop beanbagging him. We get him down, and then we start trying to get him into custody. And that's when ultimately we start pleading with him. I can remember vividly. So, I'm trying to help you. Stop. We're going to get you medical. And I wasn't even mad at him. I just couldn't believe it was happening.
Yeah.
And it just was so crazy. And he just never stopped until the light went up. It was like watching a light go up. And so that's what these guys are doing in these cases, having been involved in one.
So
it manifests different ways, though. I do want to say not everybody is in that determined fight. Some people are manifesting fear. Some people are manifesting an inability to breathe. Some people are manifesting like saying out loud. So I'm not saying everyone is just fighting to death, but they're all having some cardiac event that ultimately is lethal. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so I think what I'm going to do is when we post this podcast below in the description, I'm going to actually have some links to the scientific articles that you can read and you can share with administration and stuff like that. Chad and I are not doctors. We're not claiming to be or anything like that. We just go on the research of what we know through the years of our experience and through the studying that we have done. So I want to provide that to you so you can check that out in the link, of course. Is there anything that you kind of want to add about the move itself, the prone position?
Yeah. So have a trained approach to it. And that trained approach, in my opinion, should include some kind of head stability or pinning. And not manipulation where you're turning their head, you're pinning their head down. It should have some kind of hip pin. The most you could do a street ride rear mount where your feet are over the legs and not inserted underneath, where you're connecting yourself and you have your hips in, and you could put pressure on the hips that way.
Yeah.
You could do a knee on top where you drive the shin all the way across. Our for the hips, our target area is belt line or below. If they were to be wearing a belt, they may not be wearing a belt at the time, or their pants may be sagging, whatever. Where a belt would ride, if it were properly applied, I want to be below that line, below that lower back. And then some kind of leg entanglement. Different people feel differently about this. I'm not a huge fan, but I would not say it's not effective, and I would not say it's not an option. Different companies teach it different ways. If you have the head and the hips controlled, I don't have problems. Also, putting manpower down on the legs, and there are effective ways to do that. Why, if, and once again, we're not doctors, but it's an important topic. We're also not naive to best practices. We're also not naive to force that limits injury to police officers and suspects. We're actually, I would argue, leaders in the law enforcement field on developing force options that actually do limit injury to officers and limit injury to suspects. So why be so mindful of where we are? There is some evidence that says it's a complete myth that any pressure on a prone person, it's a complete myth that is causal to death. And I would argue, let's just stay out of that argument, and let's just develop good training practices that allow us to do both, that allow us to be aware of the perception of weight on someone's back. That perception is that you're contributing to their death. Let's just stay off their back. If you pin their neck down, the perception is somehow I'm pinning their neck down. You've limited their ability to breathe. Let's just stay off their neck. We can easily come up with systems that lend control and lend dominance and answer those perceptual questions that a lawmaker might have, or a layperson might have, or an administrator might have. So let's just stay out of those areas and not be there. Stay off their spine, stay off their neck, stay off their upper back, so there's no perception that you inhibited breathing. Just stay out of that area. Another reason we want to be fundamentally sound in our positioning is the function of prone restraint. The function is custody. If I kneel across the back and then the arms come back, I'm literally kneeling in the place I need his hands to go to gain custody. So even if it was the safest position in the world, let's flip this around and go, well, the safest thing you could do is put your knee across the middle of his back and pin his middle back to the ground. Then he could never move. Well, I still can't handcuff him because I'm in the way. So that's still not the answer to that problem. So just get off the back, stay out of that area, and police each other up, help each other on these calls. Hey, man, move your knee. You're in the way. Put your knee across his butt or her butt so that we're not getting in there. The issues in court and in an internal review or a civilian-led review from kneeling in inappropriate places and having an untimely death are going to be substantial. And so let's just avoid those. And lateral restraint can avoid some of those as well. That's why we're not, hey, you want to train that as an option? That's fine. It's just that lateral restraint's not always the answer.
And I think that officers also have to be careful too, that we realize that combat is fluid. And when you have someone who doesn't want to be arrested, things happen. So you have to be positionally aware and your tactics will change. If you end up with a knee across your back or mounted or whatever, it's part of it. What comes after is the after action report of you being able to articulate what occurred, which is massively important.
I think I said this, but I want to make sure I say it so people understand our position. And I'm confident, as you and I have spoken, that we feel the same way. Because I don't want to double down, because I'm not a doctor, on what's actually causing the death or what's not. However, having said that, I do want to rely on data from medical personnel and from actual studies that have been done. And these studies are being done in a scientific, using the scientific model, and they're being tested. That's being examined by other peers who understand and use that model, not by me, and not by Ari. So studies that have been published or that have been examined in this way that have findings are reliable sources of information. And I think what you and I are in agreement with is there might be individual studies that play to Chad's opinion on this matter. I want to be really careful about handpicking individual studies or individual points of view, and then digging my heels in and saying, well, this is the point of view, when I totally understand that I can say that all I want until someone dies, and then the other point of view might be used to impeach the very person I trained or myself if I'm using those techniques. So what I want to try to do is stay out of the minutia of the whole medical argument of, does pressure on a prone person kill or not? Chad doesn't want to make that argument, but I do want to rely on other people who are qualified, who have already gone down that rabbit hole, and then build my tactics and my training off of that data. Yeah.
And we know that prone arrests work.
Yes. And safely for everybody.
Yeah.
When done in a grappling prone arrest with dominant positioning in safe areas with a grappling emphasis, lead to control and a reduction of injury.
Well, I appreciate you chatting with me, Chad. And one thing I want to add before we leave here, there's a segment of the No Zoo Lions podcast that we're going to start introducing, and it's called The Lion's Share. And that's where you, the listeners, and people who are watching, you can send us questions. And so I had a question that came in during the last week here that I'm going to pose to you, Chad. And it's just
so everyone knows I don't even know what it is yet.
That's true. But it's great when stuff comes in because they're just asking us specific things. So John wants to ask you, what is the biggest change that you've seen in police training, specifically on, like, for technique wise? What would be like the biggest one that, or something that is like changed how we used to do things and how things are? What's one of the biggest things for you?
So can I do a two-part answer on this,
You
Ari?
can. Yeah.
Okay. So because there's two things that really stand out to me from 1998 to today, and I'm still active for those guys listening with Bates Metro.
Yeah.
The first thing is we have begun to move away from a step-by-step technique lesson plan that says these are the techniques and these are going to work and this is how you do these techniques. We've begun to move away from that to these are acceptable techniques, but there might be something else that's also acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And also a principle and concept based training methodology. Saying this is what we're trying to achieve. This is a way you could do it, but there could be other ways. As long as it's reasonable, it's good. So I've seen a move to that, which is way positive.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Second thing is a sharp and growing uptick towards being proficient in grappling arts, whether that be wrestling or jujitsu. I believe the lag time in this becoming more and more prominent. Simply, if you think about it, Horian was doing privates in people's garages within my lifetime, introducing jiu-jitsu in America. It just wasn't here. Wrestling was here. And if you go back to the old DT manuals, which you've shared with me, and I know you're a student of the game, it was boxing, judo, wrestling in the old days. Then we moved away from that. We moved into some of the Taekwondo, Aikido, striking, Krav, these kind of systems. I've seen a turn back towards grappling-based systemology. And I don't believe we'll ever leave that because it works. There's a results business. If I can achieve dominant position, if I can escape inferior positions, if I can establish dominant positions, I'm going to be able to be far more successful in my applications of force, and they're actually going to work. So I believe those are the two biggest things. Let's get away from a technique-based manual that only talks about techniques, not concepts or principles, and you can only do this, total nonsense. And then the second thing would be a growing proliferation of grappling. And I'll also say real quick, the reason that it's also starting to grow now is, remember when guys like me in 98, early 2000s were trying to introduce it to policing, none of the brass was doing any of it because it was new to us.
Right.
I was white belt in 98, 2000, early 2000. I was a blue belt early 2000s. So it's not like I'm experienced. None of my brass has ever even rolled.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to sell them something they have no knowledge of.
Right.
Now the guys who were with me in those hallways and they were training with me in those mat rooms, I chose not to promote. Well, they did. They're lieutenants, they're captains, they're chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're rolling. So now we have guys in those executive positions that are also seeing the value of what we're doing. And then we can start to show it statistically. So those are the biggest changes I've seen.
Awesome. Well, if you have a question for either Chad or myself, and we can feature it on our segment called The Lion's Share, we will. And we really appreciate you signing in and watching the No Zoo Lions podcast. Remember, we are on Spotify and now also on YouTube. You can catch us there. And we will catch you next time. If you have any questions or comments, just go to our website, nozoolions.com. And remember, don't follow us, lead with us. Take care.